So this evening, I would like to welcome Dr. Ben Gaunt, and I think Ben is very well known to many of you in a wide variety of different scenarios, especially those of us here in the rural Eastern Cape. And Ben tonight is going to cover with us the elephant in the room, a brief guide on how not to get trampled by the medico-legal stampede. Very exciting topic for an issue that actually affects our clinicians both directly and also the budgets in our departments and in our facilities, and has an impact on our ability to actually provide services. So Ben Gaunt has been passionate about rural health since second year varsity, and he worked at Ngwelezana Hospital in KZN as a junior doctor. And then he spent a year in New Zealand recovering. In 2005, he and his wife Taryn moved to Zithulele Hospital on the Wild Coast in the Eastern Cape, where they had the privilege of serving the community and living out their dream at the same time. If you want details, he wrote a book called Hope, a Goat in a Hospital, available on Amazon. I have read it. It's great, especially those of you who are finding yourself in managerial positions for some inspiration. And then in 2022, he found himself a refugee from institutional politics, and he now works for the ECDOH as a clinical medico-legal advisor. So this is not just Ben's rural perspective on medico-legal. He's actually sitting within Bishu as although living in Port Alfred, but within the Bishu managerial level of looking at medico-legal issues. And we are very pleased to have him here this evening. Ben, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to hand over to you.
Thanks so much, Madeleine. Let's see if we can get this working.
Yeah, that's looking great.
Is it at full size? Yeah, there we go. Great. I don't think you really need to see me. Whoopsie, let's go backwards. Maybe I'll put my video on, you can see me in the corner. So hello everyone, and thanks for tuning in on a Tuesday night. Slightly out of sync with the others, which have been Mondays. Yes, and Madeleine, thanks for the introduction. I'm happy to say that I'm not in Bishu, as you said. I'm in Port Alfred. People say, are you from Bishu now? I'm like, no. But I am working in the medico-legal sphere. And as you heard there in that kind of brief biography, I, once upon a time, spent a year in New Zealand recovering from the pre-ARV era, but really being exposed to a completely different type of medicine. And it was practiced with such a awareness and almost fear of medico-legal things. And it was so foreign to anything that I'd known up to that point. And to find ourselves in that same scenario now, not even 20 years later, is quite remarkable, because it was the furthest thing from our minds when we moved to Zithulele in 2005. And I think for many of us trying to get through the everyday workload, be it in OPD or labor ward or wherever we are in the clinics or elsewhere in the hospital, we almost feel like this medico-legal thing is just something we can't quite even think about. And yet, unfortunately, it's become a massive reality. So thanks for including it in this. As you heard or possibly know, I am a refugee from institutional politics. I've decided that's the most polite and honest way to describe what happened in 2022. But I'm very excited to be part of the medico-legal work, because I think that it's extremely important. And as much as I miss one-on-one patient care and management of teams, I really hope that what I say tonight, but also what I do day by day, can contribute to us making sure that the system doesn't actually collapse. So that's kind of by way of introduction. And I want to show you briefly kind of what the plan is. You know, overview slide, always a good idea, but I hardly knew what to write here. We're going to talk about it from a kind of a theoretical point of view very briefly. I've called it those pesky forms. Medico-legal things pop up in remarkably many different ways. And so I'm just going to touch on some of them. Then I'm going to speak about the real elephant in the room, and that's the clinical negligence claims that almost every department of health is facing across the country. And then most importantly, perhaps, some of the clinical strategies that we can employ to to deal with that, to both protect ourselves in the here and now, but also to actually take the learning from this new world back into the clinical space and actually improve clinical care, because I think that's really why the vast majority of us became health professionals. So that's kind of the goal. I don't honestly know how long I'll speak for. I'll definitely be within time, but I'm actually hoping that we can have something of a conversation afterwards. Madeleine is finalizing the pack that gets sent out every week, and she asked me what we should put in there. And to be honest, I'm not entirely sure. So if there are resources or questions that you have, please raise those at the end of the talk. I would love to engage with them. And this is, to be honest, this is the first time I've spoken on this topic. So it's new ground, and I really want to make it relevant and useful to clinical audiences. So feedback is appreciated, and please engage. All right, so theory. Thought those 3 pictures sum up the current situation. My mentor, and 1 or 2 of these slides are directly from him, Jerry Boone, who's been working as a clinical medico-legal advisor here in the Eastern Cape for the past 4 years. He is now retired for a second time. But he says, and I think he's right, that the medico-legal litigation situation, especially in the Eastern Cape, is the biggest threat to the function of the Department of Health, maybe ever. And that's a pretty radical statement for those of us who lived through pre-ARV HIV. All of us who lived through COVID. Those were things that came upon us and that we had to respond to. And without an adequate response, we would have been completely overwhelmed and things would have collapsed. That is the scale of the problem we're talking about here. Nobody knows exactly what the numbers are, but we measure it in some way by means of contingent liability, which means if all the claims against the state were found to be true and were paid out at the amount claimed, the Department of Health just in the Eastern Cape would be looking at something like 40 billion, perhaps creeping up towards 50 billion rand. And to put that in perspective, that is the amount of money that it takes to run the whole department, all its employees, all the medication, everything we do, for about 2 years. So this is a real disaster, and it's happening at a time when the country's fiscus is under severe pressure. And that has implications in terms of staff pay and all the stuff that goes with it, as we know. But the reality is that if we don't find a way to get on top of this situation, we are facing the complete collapse of our health system, not just the non-implementation of NHI. So this is a very real problem. And just as we did when we were learning about HIV back in the day, just as we do when we try and strategize about how to manage TB better, 2 other significant threats to people and the health system, we need to make sure that we are aware and thoughtful about the way that we engage with the medical legal realities that we're facing. It's not something that's going to go away quickly. In one form or another, this is going to be our reality, probably for the rest of our careers. Hopefully we can turn that tap so that it's not pouring water at the same speed, but and there are many things that need to be done to actually make that happen. There's changes in legislation, and there's serious administrative strategies that can be employed and are being employed to some degree or another. But at the end of the day, actually, the biggest solution is better clinical care, and we know the challenges that we face in terms of providing that. So this is really a perfect storm, but it's one that we face and we can't run away from. So yeah, we need to take it on. And I thought, just in terms of trying to get our head around why it's important and what its implications are, got 2 slides here. One is, what are the implications for clinicians? And I think we know this for ourselves, but if you ask yourself, how does it change how you feel about going to work? I see a lot of fear. People don't know what's involved. They don't know whether they're at risk. We don't know, and none of us want to be the subject of a complaint, but we kind of live in fear. We read stats that say, you know, almost every single one of us will be the subject of a complaint. Certainly in the US, that's the case. And so we end up practicing defensive medicine. And defensive medicine is a terrible way to practice medicine because it puts us at the center of the interaction instead of the patient. And we end up doing a whole lot of things that are probably bad, not just financially, but bad for patients, bad for us, bad for the relationship. And so one of the real challenges that we need to kind of take away from this conversation is how do we go on the defensive without practicing defensive medicine? And then the third thing really is a blame culture. It's an easy thing to slip into when there's a bunch of people out there wanting to point fingers. It's much easier to join them and point a finger somewhere other than you. And so everyone ends up blaming everybody else. And unfortunately, that's usually a terrible way to improve a system. It's a terrible way to build workplace relationships and organizational culture. And so all of those things suffer. So our patients suffer, we suffer, the system suffers. And speaking about the system, the implications are dire. The amount of money that is being lost to medico-legal payouts is staggering. In the Eastern Cape alone, we've paid out nearly 4 billion rands worth of claims in the last couple of years. And if you think about that money having to come from somewhere because it's not budgeted for, the reality is it's come from the other things we wanted to do as a health department, and we can't escape that reality. The country doesn't have money sitting in a slush fund for medico-legal. There might be other slush funds, but let's not go there. Worse care, well, that's obviously what happens when you've got less money and demotivated staff. And then the brain drain. I think it's a reality. If we are being asked to perform at a high standard and not feeling like we have the tools to do it, it's very easy to become demotivated, and unfortunately put with the other things that can demotivate us at a time like this. And the reality is that the system actually loses people, whether that's to the private sector or to other spheres of work, or whether it's to overseas. So I kind of want to put a different spin on it, because I think that it is very easy to engage medico-legal and almost think, woe is us. And I've always said about the public health sector that you need to find just the right balance between enough dissatisfaction that you keeping and carrying on trying to make it better, but enough acceptance of the status quo and what is, that you are able to keep functioning within the system, because that's how you make a difference at the end of the day. If you're not able to handle the day-to-day stress, you leave. If you
Ben?
make people, yes. Did I break up? Did you lose me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can still hear you loud and clear.
Oh, that's a relief. Okay, I'll carry on then. There's load shedding here in Port Alfred at the moment, so I'm on alert. Yeah, if you make peace with the status quo and you don't feel empowered to change it, then obviously we can't make the system better. So really, I think my challenge to us as clinical people, because we are often real agents of change and drivers of progress, is can we seize this perhaps seminal moment in our kind of country's health system's history as an opportunity rather than just a threat? Can we see it as an opportunity to develop leadership? Can we see it as an opportunity to increase patient-centeredness? And I really think that's the key. And can we find ways to leverage the focus on medico-legal things to improve the quality of care? So that's kind of my thinking over the, over the long term, and that's ultimately what I hope to see happen as an outflow of my role. But yeah, just to remind you on the theory side, the relationship between medical errors and litigation is a complex one. And the next slide really makes it look even more complex. But there's a lot of things that go wrong. The US has unbelievable stats in this regard, like hundreds of thousands of medical errors happening all the time. We make wrong diagnoses, we give wrong doses or wrong drugs, we do all sorts of things wrong. Not all of them are very serious. Some of them are very minor. And obviously, the more serious they get, then we start to categorize them differently, adverse events. And then sometimes things go really badly wrong, and they're the kinds of things that patients or other people might litigate for. So litigation, obviously, just a fancy word for taking you to court. But even there, not all the things that could be taken to court get taken to court. I was reviewing a case where the patient had suffered a needle stick injury because a needle was left in the linen, and he climbed into bed and got a needle stick somewhere. And he sued the Department of Health, and obviously he won because you can't leave needles in the bed. But I'm sure he's not the only person who's ever had that happen to them. And so the question is, how did his one end up as litigation and the others not? And that's important to kind of think through and understand when you look at the process. But it's we see the tip of the iceberg, and that's a reminder that we need to actually deal with the whole iceberg. So we're not going to spend a long time on this slide, but it's just to highlight the different kinds of things that lead to medical errors. So starting at the bottom there, there's poor systems and compliance. We know we work in sometimes just broken systems. We have something called medical misadventure. That's when something you try to do something and it doesn't work out as you hoped. That's just unlucky. Another way of saying it. Then there's malignant care and drunkenness. If you go to work drunk, you are going to be in trouble, especially if something goes wrong. You should be in trouble anyway, but if something goes wrong, you are not going to be able to defend yourself, and neither is your employer going to defend you. Another example, if you assault a patient, you are not likely to be able to explain that away in terms of systems or resources. But obviously resourcing is an issue. We don't always have the things to do what we want to do. Poor clinical concentration and ignorance or lack of expertise, they kind of go hand in hand. That's basically making a mistake, either because you weren't completely focused on the problem, or you didn't gather all the information you needed, or because simply you just haven't got enough experience. And then obviously there's negligence, where the right thing is pretty obvious and you didn't do it. And we'll go and talk about that as well in a bit, but just to add this slightly more info here, all the different things that you can do about it. We're not going to go into them in any great detail, but obviously record keeping and then that whole process of litigation stems or follows from there. All right, so what can we do right now? And really this comes back to those things that I said in terms of turning this into opportunity. I really believe we need to be proactive about leadership. Part of me wishes there was a post in the Department of Health called leadership development, because I think that if we could do this better, and each one of us, if you're listening to this talk and you're a healthcare worker, you are almost certainly a leader in some way. You might be a junior doctor, you might be a ComServ or an intern, but you're already a leader, and you're going to become more of a leader as time goes on. And being deliberate about developing your skills, being thoughtful about actually analyzing what's happening around you and how you are responding to those things, I think can make the world of difference when it comes to actually providing good healthcare in our system. I can't promote the idea of patient-centeredness enough. The health system, particularly the public health system, often treats people like sausages in a sausage machine. And I know that a lot of that is unavoidable, well, feels unavoidable because the queues are long and there's extraordinary pressure on time. But when we see people as people, and when people feel appreciated and seen, not only do we deliver better care, but actually we reduce the chance of medico-legal events, and that's well established around the world. Obviously, and I think, you know, a big part of this talk is talking about being aware of the highest risk areas and what we can do about that. And so building guardrails, those are the clinical things that we can do to try and improve outcomes in the short and the long term. I just put 4 of my favorite LinkedIn things here, but there's millions of them. Follow some of the good leadership people, Bridget Hyacinth, Adam Smith, and others, I really think we need to rethink leadership. And there's that one on the side there. Leadership is not about being in charge. Leadership is about taking care of those in your charge. That is a true challenge, I think, to many CEOs out there, but also clinical managers, any senior doctors. We really have to, it's up to us to get beyond the ego and beyond the hierarchy and the title, and start to really engage with our teams. So yeah, I would really challenge you to do some reading on this. There's lots of material that I'm happy to share with you. Reach out to me or to Madeleine. It's honestly a key when it comes to medical legal things. Patient-centered, can I emphasize this enough? We used to have a saying at Zithulele and Jengo CC1, is this how I would treat my mother, sister, father, brother? Is the care you're providing good enough for you? And if it's not, why not? If there's a system constraint that's making it impossible, that's one thing. But if it's just simply about the way you're delivering care, the kinds of explanations you're giving your patients, etc., those are easy to remedy. And I'd really, really encourage you to promote this kind of thinking in your teams. It might seem far away. It depends so much on the team that you're in. Sometimes this can feel almost impossible. Like, how will we ever get the culture to this point within our organization? But with effort and repetitive effort, you can do it, and it's highly, highly worth it. This is just an interesting slide about why people sue. It's stats from the States, and it's old, but I don't think it's changed much. So often they're advised to. We know that in our own context, certainly in the Eastern Cape, we have lawyers going around making extraordinary promises to patients. Sometimes they're promising them a house, sometimes they're promising them a cure, and sometimes they're telling them that the government's got money for people with disabilities. But so there's a lot of touting, but even touting aside, the ones we really want to focus on are the ones that we can change, and that's where the doctor is not completely honest or lied. Our patients are not stupid. Some of them might be poorly educated in the formal sense, but they're not stupid. And when we don't offer them an honest explanation, when we don't try to kind of own up when things go wrong, whether either from our own actions or just the system that's let somebody down, you can just see how that comes back time and time again, stated in all sorts of different ways, but basically the patient didn't feel seen or heard. All right. I'm not going to spend nearly as long on this slide as I could. I toyed with breaking it up into lots of different slides, but then I realized we'd be here all night. These are the kind of subtle medical legal things that pop into everyday life. And I just wanted to draw your attention to them, and perhaps they can be subjects of talks in the future as I develop a portfolio of talks. But death notification forms, I want to highlight two things. There's actually a whole course you can do on how to fill in a death notification form. If that feels over the top, at least make sure you're focusing on how to actually fill in a cause of death. I mean, it actually says on the form, do not write cardiorespiratory arrest. And what do some doctors write? Cardiorespiratory arrest. That's inexcusable. But most importantly is natural or unnatural death. I had probably the most extreme example was when I had a family member come and ask me for a death notification form of a relative who'd been found in the veldt after being missing for 5 days and was just buried with no input from forensics. And then he came 10 days later looking for a notification. I was like, there is no way we can tell how or why this person died. And so unnatural deaths, according to South African law, require an inquest. Now, depending on where you're working, and if your rural area is anything like the rural area around Mkonduli and Zithulele, the police themselves might not know what the process is for an inquest. So you need to know. You need to know which deaths and what is involved. An inquest is simply an inquiry to determine how the person died. And then as a second question, if it was an unnatural death and if it was due to human agency, should someone be held responsible? And if the answer to that is either it was a natural death or it was an unnatural death, but it couldn't have been avoided, then that's the end. the inquest and nothing further happens. But if there's, and sometimes it's obvious that someone must be held responsible. There's a gunshot, okay, a wound, and that killed the person. But what if they died shortly after having a heart attack? So the inquest is there to make sure that the right thing gets done. And it's important that we understand that process and that we sign and take our responsibility to sign death notification forms seriously. I don't want to dwell on it, but I do want to encourage people not to take it too lightly. You might have read in the press, there was a doctor arrested in Durban. I saw he was 80-something years old. He had signed off the death of somebody who was wanting to make a fraudulent claim for life insurance. Now, obviously, if you're actually intentionally criminal, that's a different story altogether. But it is remarkable how subtly people can approach you for help. So keep your wits about you. You want to help the patient, but you also need to make sure you're doing the right thing. J88, again, you can do a whole course on how to fill in a J88. It's such an important legal document. You have to fill it in if you're requested to fill it in. If you were the doctor who saw the patient, you don't have an option. It's a part of the patient's right to lodge a criminal case against somebody, and obviously they need the medical evidence. So you need to fill that J88 in responsibly. You need to provide clear descriptions of the injuries. You need to state what is within your knowledge. I think this is something that we come back to time and time again with medico-legal things. State what you know to be true. If it's hearsay or you don't know it or somebody else saw the patient. Now, if you're the clinical manager, somebody else might have seen the patient. I'll come to that in a moment. But don't speculate in anything. You can speculate in your differential diagnosis and your clinical notes, but don't speculate on a legal form unless you clearly indicate that you're speculating. And there might be a place for that. But if there is a wound, state how big it is. Is it fresh? If it's old, state it's old. You need to be able to clearly describe it. And then obviously you need to remember to fill in the affidavit sections as well, so you can avoid going to court where possible. Sometimes it's inevitable. The defense might try to stall things by calling unnecessary witnesses. If you're going to court, remember you're going to court to speak only to your J88. You're not on trial. And again, you speak only to what you know. The same with RAF forms. You speak to what you know. RAF forms needs ICD-10 codes, and depending on which province you're in, that may be something that's familiar or unfamiliar to you, but the EM guidance app has a wonderful tool on it for ICD-10 codes, so that if you're unfamiliar and you find yourself needing to find one, I highly recommend using EM guidance. Same with injury on duty forms. If somebody's been injured on duty, they're meant to actually report it to the commissioner within 14 days and get a medical examination. And it might be your good fortune to be the doctor to see them in casualty. You might be brought that form. Again, you have to fill it in. It's not really a discretionary request. And then just to say, obviously, if you're the same with insurance forms as well, especially when people have passed away. If you are the clinical manager, you might find yourself being asked to do these for people who are no longer in the employ of the hospital. That is acceptable. Again, you were wanting to put the patient first and make it possible for them to claim things that are their due. And so as much as it feels like boring paperwork compared to something exciting like putting in a chest strain or intubating somebody, our slogan used to be paperwork saves lives. Paperwork can provide a source of income for a family, and obviously it's only if they meet criteria, but done properly, you can really make people's lives easier. Again, if you're the clinical manager filling it in, you want to indicate, I filled this form in my capacity as clinical manager on behalf of Dr. So-and-so, who no longer works here. And then you fill it in from their notes. And if they didn't say whether the patient was drunk or not, then you can say not noted, because you've got no idea. Don't make things up. All right, like I said, these things are courses, let alone talks in their own right, but I'm going to move on. I had to put in a slide about this wonderful organization. This is live on YouTube and probably there for posterity, so let me not say too much about some of the failings, but there's quite a lot that's kind of important to know about. The one bottom right, don't forget your annual fee. Please don't forget your annual fee. I reminded my team every year of that, because boy, if you forget to pay or you're R1 short, your life will become a misery. But it is really important also, and also, sorry, you won't be registered with the HPCSA, which does make practicing legally a bit of a problem. It is important to be aware of those ethical rules for practitioners. They don't make riveting reading like the ARV guidelines do, but it's important to know about. And yeah, I think if you have questions, you're not sure what to do, it's important to ask. That used to be one of my rules. The 2 rules for being a good health professional is be prepared to work hard and know when to ask for help. And the same applies to the medical legal sphere. So now the elephant. When I started looking up my elephant photos, I almost wanted to turn this into a slideshow of elephant photos. But anyway, I really want to just touch on the risk areas and then some in the 2 main risk areas to highlight the things that I think can make the biggest difference to the risk that both the health system and we as individual people are exposed to. So this is real life data. It's from the Eastern Cape, and obviously it will vary a little bit by province, and it's not by the number of cases brought, it's about the money paid out, which I think is at the end of the day what the biggest issue is. Although obviously, even if you're involved in a small value claim, it can be very stressful. The reality is, as you can see in the slide, nearly 90% of the money that's paid out in the Eastern Cape is paid out for hypoxic ischemic brain injury. That's HIBI. What we used to call HIE, but please don't. We'll get to that. Hypoxic ischemic brain injury, which occurs intrapartum, is, I mean, it's a terrible clinical thing for the patient and for the family to deal with. Sometimes the life expectancy is significantly affected, but sometimes life expectancy might remain quite good, but their functional status is not. And so the costs involved in terms of caring for those people and making sure that they are compensated, both general damages and also loss of income, really run into several millions of rands, tens of millions of rands, up to 30 million rand per case. You will have seen the kind of court judgment that everyone's very excited about, especially in the Eastern Cape, where the common law was developed to allow the defendant, in this case the Eastern Cape Department of Health, to provide services in lieu of money. That's because in negligence law up until now, the only compensation you could really offer somebody, or that the courts could order you to offer, was money. And the argument offered or expounded in that case was that money is really to purchase services, and we can provide the services, number one, but also that money is being taken away from other people. So paying one person 30 million and then not being able to immunize the next person's child doesn't seem to be in line with the constitutional imperative to develop health for everyone. So let me not get sidetracked onto that case, which is a very interesting case and has lots of implications for all of us. The bottom line, though, is that hypoxic ischemic brain injury is the biggest issue. Okay, you will see that it's followed by orthopedics out of all the other domains. So obstetrics, if you look at that list of things on the side, obstetrics manifests in several ways. So we also get sued for maternal deaths, brachial plexus injuries, the management of shoulder dystocia, loss of fertility. That's usually women who've needed a hysterectomy, often following bleeding at Caesar or sepsis. And then we do also get sued for neonatal deaths, sometimes for stillbirths, and for maternal deaths. And then in neonatology, kind of closely allied, and in many of our hospitals obviously managed in the maternity unit, retinitis of prematurity is increasingly an issue, and they're high value claims as well. So the labor ward is where the action's at, and we're going to get into that in a bit more detail. But the one discipline outside of labor ward is orthopedics, and particularly long bone fractures, legs and arms, which are managed badly, followed up badly, and leave people with quite significant disabilities because of the malunions or non-unions that occur. So those are really where it's at. That means not that you don't have to care about your diabetic patient, but you can probably put away the fear. So, I mean, on one hand, I want to say don't be fearful at all. But if you're going to be fearful, the two places you can be fearful are in the labor ward and in orthopedics outpatients. Everywhere else, you're going to be all right. So that's kind of one message, and I don't know if it's a healthy one, but it's the reality is this is the pattern of claims that we're seeing, overwhelmingly so, whether you do it by cases or money. I wanted to share this slide because I think that a lot of people are not clear as to actually who's judging us and on what, against what standard are we being judged. So this is really important to just have your head around. You've heard this before, but we get judged by what a reasonable doctor would have done. There are three aspects to that. The first is a person with equivalent experience and qualifications in your situation. Okay, you can break that down. That's obviously more than one thing in that sentence. But that means that if you're a ComServe, you will be judged based on what a reasonable ComServe in your rural location should have done. And so you're not judged against what could a specialist obstetrician in the private sector could have managed. You're asked what somebody with your level of training and experience could have managed. And that's super important because I think sometimes we think we're going to be judged by standards that are quite simply impossible to meet. And that is not the case. But that does also mean that you can't be a cowboy and think that you're going to be able to manage as if you were a specialist. So the two kind of tests of reasonableness is that you would have reasonably foreseen the danger. Okay, that means you are aware of what the risks involved are, and that you take reasonable steps to avoid or mitigate the harm. I'll give you an example. So if you're managing a patient who's previous Caesar ×2, and she comes in labor, or thinking she's in labor, and she's 1 centimeter dilated, and your hospital, for one reason or another, can't perform cesarean sections at that point because either there's a flood in the theater or the generator's not working, or there's only one doctor on call, allowing her to labor in your institution is negligent because you can reasonably foresee that she is going to go into labor imminently, she's already in latent labor, and that she's going to need a Caesar because she's previous Caesar ×2. Now, I mean, the fact is actually if she was previous Caesar ×1, allowing her to labor in your unit is actually fine as long as you then transfer her as soon as there are signs of danger. So can you see there's a subtle difference there? You foresee the danger. The one obviously needs a Caesar, the other one might not, but you've got to take reasonable steps to avoid or mitigate the harm. So if you just sit there until she crosses the action line, and then an hour later, the nurse calls you, and then you phone EMS, and it's another 5 hours to transfer the patient. That was not reasonable, and you should have foreseen that there was going to be a problem. So it's a person just like you in your situation who sees that something could go wrong and takes reasonable steps. That's the test. And I used to put it a little bit more simply to my team when I said, we are responsible for process, not outcome. If you've been a doctor for any length of time, you will have realized that already. Patients who you think will survive don't, and patients who you think are going to die miraculously survive. We are not God, and we do not determine those things, but we are responsible for making sure that we do things the way they're meant to be done. And then balance of probabilities. Now, in a criminal trial, you have to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, but in a civil trial, you only have to balance, on the balance of probabilities, have your explanation be the most likely. So that does make it a little bit harder for us to defend some things. All right, I want to just draw your attention to these 6 things in obstetrics. I think they account for almost everything that we get sued for in one way or another. There are, the occasional cases outside of this. Fetal heart rate monitoring. This is the number one reason we lose cases, is because we don't monitor the fetal heart properly. And that does not mean doing a CTG on everybody. The guidelines require that you monitor the fetal heart and record it every 30 minutes during labor. And that obviously is by the midwives, not necessarily by a doctor. But if we don't do it and don't record it, and doing a CTG for an hour and then not looking at the baby for 2 hours at all isn't actually good enough. We lose cases because we don't do fetal heart rate monitoring for the last 2.5 hours of labor. And then rather surprisingly, we get a baby whose APGAR is 2 and 3, and we wonder what happened. Well, we don't know what happened, but that's because we weren't looking. So if there's one thing we can do to make claims less, it's fetal heart rate monitoring according to the guidelines. The second thing is CTG interpretation. That's a skill, and it's a skill that needs constant, nuanced repetition. But the more you read and learn about CTGs, the easier they become. Thirdly, the partogram. I mean, that is really the basics of obstetrics, but you'll be surprised how often it is not done or not done properly. So again, that's something that we just have to do right. The second stage of labor, the guidelines are reasonably clear on it, but if you want some more detail in the Rural Doctor's Handbook that we distributed, you can find it at ruraldoc.info. There's rules, safety rules for the second stage of labor. Set the fence a little bit back from the cliff and make sure that there are 2 of you making a decision as to whether or not to proceed with the second stage of labor. It is the most dangerous time of your life, regardless of where you live in the world. So we need to manage it carefully. Getting to theatre in an emergency, I can't tell you how often we drop the ball at that point. It was a remarkable case I reviewed the other day, and I won't tell you the long sob story, but after a long sob story and a failed vacuum or forceps, I can't remember, the doctor booked an emergency Caesar. And an hour and 20 minutes later, when the patient eventually made it to theatre, they might have had to walk there even, I'm not sure, the doctor was nowhere to be found. How is that possible? That's just negligent. And so if we don't have to get a lot of extra money or do a whole lot of things differently, we just have to, once we've booked a Caesar for fetal distress, we have to manage that patient through. And in district hospitals, we have the privilege that often they're the only one in the queue. It's much harder in a regional or tertiary hospital where there's maybe 20 others in the queue, and juggling them becomes an issue. And then I put it sixth, although obviously chronologically it's first, is gestational age calculation. That goes badly wrong often. If you're in a clinic, please sit with the nurses and explain to them that the x-axis on that SF chart is time. 1 block equals 1 week. That would be helpful as a start, but doctors get it wrong all the time as well. And if we don't know the gestational age accurately, we make decisions that are dodgy or just plain wrong. So some solutions: awareness of the guidelines. There are new guidelines about to be published. I don't know if they'll be out by April, but they should be out by May if they're not. I think they're better than before. The new neonatal guidelines are going to be amazing. I've got a sneak peek and they're fantastic. It's got a CTG analysis guide in it. It's also in the Rural Doctor's Handbook. Pretty much verbatim what's going to be in the National Maternity Guideline. And the fetal heart rate monitoring, you should probably be photocopying and putting on every wall in labor ward, making sure that labor ward staff are aware of it. I think that medico-legal training is important as well, because people are scared, and as fear shuts down your ability to think, we often don't do it very well. These 2 things that are 4th and 5th are super important. Training people to record risk assessments. There's some weird stuff that gets written in maternity files, and I don't have time to go into all of them, but you know, when a perfectly normal pregnancy, and then somebody will write risk assessment, risk factor, fetal distress. It's like, no. And then when they develop fetal distress, they forget about it. So it's about understanding what is at risk here. Why am I worried? Am I worried? Should I be worried? And then following through on those specific aspects. And perhaps most importantly of all is record your thinking. Why did you do what you did? Don't just say all's well, you know, or CTG reactive. That's also not actually good enough, by the way. It doesn't tell us what you actually saw. Write what the baseline is and the variability and whether they're D cells or not. And record your thinking. Let's carry on for an hour, and if she doesn't progress, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. you cannot remember one case out of 1,000 10 years later. And if you're trying to reconstruct what actually happened, the more clear your notes are, the better. As I said, paperwork saves lives. Use paperwork correctly, and I would really encourage every labor ward to start developing a habit of MCR chart audits. That's probably the competence of the area manager, but it's something that we can really promote at our PPIP meetings and as doctors in the labor ward. Let's pick up a chart and see whether it's being filled in correctly. It is possible to do and to do properly. And then if you haven't already implemented in the Eastern, well, you don't have to be in the Eastern Cape to do it. The Eastern Cape developed the neonatal encephalopathy addendum in 2021. And it's literally paperwork that walks you through the national guidelines and does important extra things like sending a placenta. If you've got a low APGAR baby and you send the placenta, a remarkable number of times you will find that there was a placental abnormality or infection or some other thing that has contributed to the outcome. That is important for you to know. Obviously, you're not going to get that result on day 2, but it's going to really change how you explain things to the mother, and it's going to radically change your ability to defend yourself in court. So add that quiver to your bow. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is to safeguard files. In our institutions, we have to be involved with this as doctors. Not that you have to keep the key and do the filing yourself, but promote the idea, because we lose cases because we can't find the files. And at the end of the day, it feels like it's our reputation that gets sullied, because obviously it must have been our fault. The patient came to harm, whereas you know you made good notes. And if only you could see them, you'd be able to defend yourself. So those are the things that I would focus on in obstetrics. Last couple of minutes, a word about orthopedics. Learn to describe a fracture. I think there's been stuff on orthopedics during this series as well, and I saw that there were some excellent resources promoted. You really do have to be able to do basic orthopedics if you're in a rural hospital. And you know what? If you don't know, ask. That's fine. Ask if the fracture and its position is acceptable, or use a resource. Again, there's a page called The Angle on Orthopedics in the Rural Doctor's Handbook that tells you what isn't acceptable. Do the basics well. Wash out open fractures. Prescribe antibiotics. Follow up appropriately. It's not appropriate to see a person, put them in a circular pop and tell them to come back in 8 weeks' time. It's also not sensible to see a tibia fracture 3 weeks after, it happens, and take off the pop, because it's really not going to have healed yet. I'm talking about an adult. And as the reality of resource constraints hits home, or if it hasn't already, document the reasons for conservative management. Not everybody's going to get an RF. Write down why they didn't. Write down why you decided they were appropriate for conservative management, or otherwise whether you were forced into conservative management, and what safeguards you put in place in terms of follow-up and review, so that you can make sure that you optimize their outcome. I know it's a talk about elephants, but I had to put in a lion photo. Don't run from risk. I think we sometimes get so fearful that when something goes wrong, we just put our head, maybe I should have put an ostrich here, put our heads in the sand, pretend it didn't happen, hope it didn't happen, and hope that when it comes to court in 10 years' time, we won't be anywhere to be found. That's a terrible way to manage patients, and also to manage risk in the medico-legal realities that we face. So even if the lion is snarling at you, just stand your ground. If you run from a lion, it will think you're prey. The same is true of medico-legal things and lawyers. A very quick word, this was really just to remind me to speak to malpractice insurance. I think it's obviously something that's high up on people's list of questions. Should you have it? So state doctors are currently still indemnified by the state. And the person who gets sued in the case of all of these cases is actually the MEC, because they are the custodian of the department. And so the reality is that you're not at this point going to be asked to pay out of your pocket. And you might have seen headlines that suggest that Treasury or others might harbor dreams of getting you to provide a refund. But the reality is that well, unless you are drunk or assault the patient, in which case you might be asked for a refund. So in other words, if you do something that is criminal, and in fact, the other word that they use is reckless, then you are at personal risk, even as a state doctor. That's never happened before, actually, not to my knowledge, and certainly not in the Eastern Cape, that somebody has actually been asked to refund the state. But I suspect that there are going to be cases in the future. But as long as you have not been reckless or criminal, you are indemnified by the state. Now, you might still want to have malpractice insurance or medical insurance from an organization like MPS or one of the other insurers, because they will still assist you with representation. For example, if you have a complaint laid against you at the HPCSA or face other similar issues. I know in the Western Cape, I think they actually assist doctors with the HPCSA complaints as well. If you didn't know that and it ever befalls you, you can reach out to the medico-legal team there. But even in the Eastern Cape, we last week, in fact, we had a doctor contact us about a HPCSA related thing. They weren't actually the subject of the complaint, but they had been dragged into it by somebody else and they weren't sure how to respond. And we have access to good legal minds. And so we provided some assistance to that doctor as well. So those possibilities exist as well. All right, this is Jerry's slide. I just thought it was a good way to end, that it's better to light a candle than curse the darkness. We face a very dark future. I see my background is entirely black. That's ESCOM, and it's metaphorical for the medico-legal situation. But, you know, between us, we've got the resources. We can share our knowledge and skills. We can create teamwork, and we can keep holding each other accountable to get better, slowly but surely. And in doing that, we will find ourselves on the right side of this process more often than not. So I'd really encourage you not to run away from it. Remember that elephants, I had to throw in two, this is a long story, but elephants are cute, sensitive, incredible creatures. And so we don't have to be scared of the elephant in the room, even if they're big and they look scary. Cool. I'm going to leave it there. As I said, there's a little bit of time for questions now and feedback, resources or other things you want to know. Won't necessarily have a chance to deal with them all in detail now, but hopefully they can be things that we can address in due course. Thanks very much for listening. Let me see if I'm going to stop sharing, then maybe I can see hands if there are any hands. If anyone has any comments or questions.
Thank you very much, Ben. That was absolutely great. Very inspiring, even with you sitting in the pitch dark. I can see there's a hand up. Dr. Williams or Hervey Williams, would you like to unmute yourself and just go ahead?
Good evening. Thank you, Ben, for the presentation. You mentioned doctors having
We can hear you. Yeah, just go ahead.
When you mentioned doctors having malpractice insurance, I mean, when I was working in Kanyakude, I tried to encourage all docs to be a member of MPS or something equivalent, because even if the government will pay the bill, they won't protect your reputation necessarily. Indeed, there is a tendency to pin the blame on the guy at the front line. So I think, I mean, I find it strange that doctors don't all have malpractice insurance or membership of an association like MPS. Thank you.
Yes, I'm inclined to agree with you, Harvey. I think especially the reputational things, like you say, and there are lots of hidden gremlins, especially with the HPCSA, that one would need to, that it's useful to be aware of. I guess it depends a little bit on how you understand the risk around you, but it's definitely I think it is wise. I mean, it is expensive these days, unfortunately, because the reality is that we're at so much more risk, so it gets more expensive. I think obstetricians are paying north of R1 million a year, but it's much cheaper if you're a state doctor.
Thank you very much. Bayanda Mbambisa, do you want to unmute and just speak?
Hi, Ben. My name is Vayanda. I'm an ophthalmologist in Port Elizabeth, and I noticed that ROP is rating high up in your in the cases that are referred. I'd like to know, with your neonatal guidelines, I think if I heard you correctly that you said that you publish guidelines. Are there referral protocols for the doctors to know when to refer? Because the cases that we get are really from children who weren't screened. So it's those ones who weren't picked up and the kids who go blind because they weren't screened. So I just wanted to know if guidelines are widely available.
No, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. The reality is that most centers don't have guidelines or even an awareness of the problem, and screening programs are beyond the capacity of most, certainly district hospitals, and in a rural province, obviously that makes it hard. So yeah, there's holes at every level, and I think an awareness of it, and in fact just an understanding. When I was reporting on not a specific case, but this issue that we manage smaller and smaller babies at district hospital levels, and we get quite good outcomes with KMC and the equipment that we've got at district hospitals, but the reality is we don't have good protocols. So that's definitely an area that needs attention.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing any other hands at the moment. I'm just double checking the chat. Just please remember to put your name and MP number in the chat. Oh, look, there is a question here from Robert Johnson. Thank you for the talk, Doc. I have a few questions. Does the filling out of J88 for other staff also count if you're not a clinical manager? For example, a ComStep for a nurse is for the patient. And in terms of death notification forms, if there's a baby death from age, but there's a herbal intoxication and you suspect it had an impact, is it then still a natural death? If there's an emergency cesarean section, but usually 5 is patient, 5-ish, patient would be up referred, is it then reasonable to have the cesarean section at your facility? Okay, so there's 3 different questions. Maybe just check in the chat if you want to.
Yeah, okay, I pulled them up, thanks. Those are all great questions. Yeah, look, I mean, if you're not the clinical manager, you can still fill in the paperwork for other people, especially if they're not there, and maybe the clinical manager's not there either. Again, especially in a rural area where people have spent serious money and time to come and see you, I don't think that's unreasonable. I think, again, you have to annotate it. And to be honest, if a nurse saw the patient and the nurse is there, then I think then the nurse can fill in the J88. I mean, the J88 is not just for a doctor, it can be filled by a professional nurse. But yeah, whatever you do, make sure that you're indicating clearly that you're filling it on behalf of someone else who's not available, and that you confine yourself to saying what they wrote, and don't be tempted to embellish it or explain it, even if it doesn't make sense. The baby death from gastro, wow. Okay, this is real life. Great question. Very difficult. And I think sometimes the challenge is that the systems that exist in rural areas don't match the law very well. So the way so remember the purpose of the inquest, and this is really difficult. This is gray, but the purpose of an inquest is to find, should somebody be held responsible for the death? Our kind of measure was, why was that herbal medicine given? If it was given by a well-meaning granny or gogo, or even a well-meaning traditional healer, you are never in a court of law going to be able to actually prove that it was the herbal medicine that killed the patient, because more often than not, it's contributory, but it's not necessarily the cause. The baby was sick, that's why they got given it. I mean, there are exceptions to that, but very rare. And the medicine is given with noble and pure intentions, and then it made it worse. Our stance was that an inquest under those circumstances increased the trauma, but it didn't actually change the outcome, because an inquest would find only that at worst it was contributory and nobody would be held responsible. So unless we felt that it didn't tick one of those boxes, we thought that somebody had done something dodgy, there was a particularly nefarious woman who held herself out as a traditional healer who definitely killed patients. We did put some of those deaths as unnatural deaths. Nothing ever happened about them because we were in the part of the country where nothing ever happened about those kinds of things, but it still was the right thing to do. But in most cases, actually, we decided that the right thing to do from a patient's perspective was to code those as natural deaths, because the gastro was ultimately the cause of death. And yeah, that's not a one-size-fits-all answer, but I think that, it is easy to approach the law sometimes as if it's just black and white. And I say, if I learned anything in rural health, it was that very little is black and white and almost everything is in the gray between. And then just to answer your Caesar question, I think it depends is almost always the right answer. But remember, above all, when it comes to maternal and health and obstetrics, is we do prioritize the life of the mother over the life of the baby. So it depends on why she would have been preferred, and it depends on what your capabilities are at your facility. So for example, we had a time where we had 4 of us with diplomas in obstetrics and a well-equipped theatre, and we were able to do stuff that wasn't within what I would call the normal competencies of a district hospital. So when we were forced into doing things, we went there reasonably willingly because we felt that we could handle it. However, if it was something where there was going to be a significant need for a blood transfusion or something like that, going there would not have been responsible at all because we didn't have easy access to blood. So it depends on what the risk is. It depends on what your capabilities at the hospital are. And more important than anything, it depends on who you're putting at risk, because it's not acceptable to risk the life of the mother for no reason. So I don't know if that's completely answers the question, but those are super, super difficult questions. And again, it depends a little bit on the mom's ability to engage as well. I see a hand from Sibongile. Perhaps you have something to add to that, Sibongile?
Hi, Ben, thank you. That was a great talk. I think I just want to make a comment. I don't know if the people in the room, when was the last time they prescribed tocolysis? So people are so quick to look at the CTGs, but what they don't look at is the contraction pattern, the change in the tone and all of those issues. So I just want to recommend that people must look at that, because there could be abruption, there could be many other things. And the second thing is, even if you have all the facilities, even if you're in a small district hospital, give the tocolysis to really improve as part of the resuscitation. Otherwise, failing to do that, delays can be sometimes unexpected, an hour can be too much. There's a lot we can do. And then, as you said, the histology, really, if you've got any outcome that you don't expect, before you get into theater, check your fetal heart and be really sure that the Caesar are still indicated. But then after you finish, if there's a risk as a low upper baby, send the placenta for histology. There's a lot of information that we can get, which is related to antenatal issues, alcohol, things that predispose this baby to this cerebral palsy. So I think that the people are doing less and less, make sure that every hospital has got formalin in the labor ward, so that at least when there is an adverse outcome, that histology, that placenta histology can actually be able to bail us out. So I think those are the 2 things I can say. Tocolysis, have salbutamol in the labor ward, have it ready, use it often, and you must have a reason not to use it. If your pulse is too high, then you have a reason not to use it, but use it as much as you can to really improve the outcomes. Thank you, Ben. And I concur with you about the Caesar. Really, really see what you must know your limitations and really be prepared when you're going for a Caesar. You can even do things like clotting time and bleeding time if there's any reason to be concerned, but really have your FDPs ready And if in doubt, just refer. But if you go in, you must know how to devascularize or put a tourniquet on a patient to save the mother's lives. That's what I can add to what you already alluded to. Thank you very much. Over.
Thank you, Sibongile. If you don't know Sibongile, she is an obstetrician here in the Eastern Cape. So that is advice coming from a position of both experience and knowledge. Yeah, and in fact, in the CTG, the fetal monitoring chapter, which Sibongile was in charge of in the new guidelines, there's actually an algorithm that walks you through, you know, if the heart rate, if there's a fetal tachycardia, do this, that, and the next thing. And the contractions are such an important part of it. Thanks for pointing out tocolysis. It's actually a really important aspect.
Thank you very much. And that's also good. Just to refer you back to those of you that's on the rural onboarding and back to your maternity pack. So in that maternity pack, Sibongile has also contributed a lot of these tools that Ben has mentioned, and lots of videos that's specifically around managing some of those crises during your cesarean section and postpartum bleeding, et cetera, because that's always the problem. When things go wrong, they can go wrong very quickly. And I liked Ben's admonition to start to recognize early when there's going to be problems, think ahead and plan ahead. Thank you very much, Ben. I think we're going to close it there. Just a small punt for the next couple of weeks. So on next week, Tuesday is a public holiday. So we won't do our talk also on the Monday night. We'll actually do it on the Wednesday evening, and that's going to be on mental health, where we have one of our psychiatrists from Weskoppies who's going to be doing a talk on mood disorders. And then we'll finish off the week after on the 27th with a bonus lecture where I'm going to be covering palliative care and having end-of-life discussions with your patients, and a little bit some of the more soft skills around that side. Thank you very much. We'll be sending out a pack tomorrow in terms of some lots of resources. There's some very good articles in the African Practice Journal, Family Practice Journal on medico-legal forms, and I'm including all of those in there for those of you who want to just go and do a little bit of reading. But yeah, I don't see any more questions. Ben, any last words, and then we can close off.
No, I think just to say, if there are questions that come up or resources that people want, or just, you know, in the throes of everyday life and you find yourself in a crisis, don't hack through it by yourself. There are people who can ask. You're welcome to phone me if you can't find anyone else. But yeah, if you do have suggestions for that pack, please get them to Madeleine or myself as soon as you can. And yeah, thanks for the questions and thanks for your attention.
Great. Have a lovely evening, everybody. Good night.